Welcome to this short introduction to key LTE concepts. In this video, we will explain the structure of the OFDM grid on an LTE downlink and review the key channels in an LTE signal. Our focus here is to explain the role of each channel and how a phone uses them to acquire all the information it needs upon being turned on. This representation of the LTE OFDM grid depicts all the channels that we are going to explain. But before, let's start with a quick refresher of the main LTE signal organization. An LTE signal is organized in frames of 10 milliseconds, each of which includes 10 subframes of 1 millisecond each. Each subframe includes 14 OFDM symbols. Each OFDM symbol includes many QPSK or QAM symbols. An FFT is applied to each individual OFDM symbol in turn, in blue, and a time signal is generated with a cyclic prefix. Then all such time signals are concatenated to form the output of a transmitter. We are now going to largely focus on one subframe or 14 symbols as our main unit. I will now use MathWorks LTE System Toolbox to generate a few subframes of an LTE signal. Let's start with one subframe. This is the slide we started with. But let's now look at 12 subframes. I have a small pause in the code after each subframe to show the progression. And we can see that not all subframes are created equal. They do not all include all channels. In many subframes, there are far fewer channels. For example, the orange and green ones, PSS and SSS, appear only every 5 subframes, while the red ones, PBCH, appear only every 10 subframes. Also note that the grid can have different numbers of light blue control symbols over time. 1 here, but 3 here. The first thing to notice about the grid is the vertical structure. Some of the channels are always contained within the middle 72 carriers, the PSS and SSS, primary and secondary synchronization channels, and PBCH, physical broadcast channel. All others span the whole bandwidth. We will see why later. Why are some channels only in the center 72 carriers? That's what we want to talk about now. Operators have the option to deploy LTE with different bandwidths, as little as 1.4 MHz or up to 20 MHz. When I turn on my phone has no idea what the bandwidth is, so it needs some signals that are always there, which means in the narrowest 1.4 MHz bandwidth to start the acquisition process. This is why PSS, SSS, and PBCH always only occupy a little less than 1.5 MHz. Let's talk about PSS and SSS first. They come every 5 subframes. The PSS is the same in every subframe and can be one of 3 sequences. So you can compute correlation with the 3 possible PSS, and when you find a peak, you get 2 pieces of information. One, where the frame timing is, except for a 5 subframe ambiguity, and 2, which PSS it is using, which is one of 3 possible ones. While the same PSS is broadcast in every subframe, a pair of SSS is broadcast in subframes 0 and 5. And that pattern lets us recognize whether we are looking at subframe 0 or subframe 5. In addition, you know which sequence out of 168 possible ones of SSS pairs was sent. Put together, the information from PSS and SSS gives you the frame timing and the cell ID, which is a number between 0 and 503, which is 3 times 168 minus 1. So we have the cell ID. What good is that? The cell ID is used to mitigate the interference from neighbor cells. This happens in a number of ways. 1. Scramble channels with a different code in neighbor cells. This is like having one cell speak German while the neighbor one speaks Italian. This makes it easier to pick out the right information. 2. coordinating the placement of information such as the reference signals or pilots to make sure they don't interfere with the ones from the neighbor cell. Now then, we speak the language of a cell and we know where the reference signals are located in the grid and what their values are. So we can use these reference signals to read in other channels. But remember, we still don't know what the signal bandwidth is. This is why we can only read the last channel that is always in the center 72 carriers, the PBCH or physical broadcast channel. The PBCH or physical broadcast channel carries the MIB or master information block. This block is sent in 4 parts over 4 frames, but each part is self-decodable. This means you don't have to wait for all 4 frames to decode it if the signal is strong enough. So what is in the MIB? Exactly what we need to know to continue deciphering the grid. The cell bandwidth, the PHICH configuration, which we will talk about later, and the frame number, except for the last 2 LSBs, which you can derive by recognizing which part of the MIB you are reading, first, second, third, or fourth part. Also, the information is scrambled with a sequence that indicates how many antennas are used in that cell. So now that we know the cell bandwidth and the cell ID, we can look at all the other channels. As we have the full bandwidth and the cell ID, we know where all the cell-specific reference signals are and what their expected values are. This means we can use those known symbols scattered throughout the grid to estimate channel effects. Armed with this channel estimate, we can equalize the grid for channel impairments and read all channels in sequence. This is where we have to look at the horizontal structure of the subframe. The first symbols are control symbols. The following ones are data symbols. One added complication: the number of control symbols can change every subframe, so we need to first figure out how many control symbols the current subframe has. That is why there is a channel called the Physical Control Format Indicator channel, or PCFICH. Its goal is to indicate the format of a control section. The only information it carries is a single scalar value, 1, 2, or 3. This is the number of control symbols in the current subframe. As this piece of information is crucial, otherwise you get the whole subframe wrong, it is heavily encoded and transmitted over 4 groups of frequencies, about a quarter of a bandwidth apart for maximum diversity. It's always at the same location in symbol 0. So we can read and decode it, and from there, we know how many control symbols there are in the subframe. The control channel is the channel that is going to tell us whether there is any data for us to read and where it is, which resource blocks are reserved for the data, and the modulation encoding scheme used. But before we can read the control data, though, we need to know where it is, and in particular, where it is not. The last channel that is sent in the control region is the Physical HRQ Indicator channel, or PHICH. This channel carries the acknowledgements, or NAC, for data that was previously sent on the uplink. There can be more or less room reserved for it, but we already have that information, which we got from decoding the master information block. Let's use MathWorks LTE System Toolbox again to see 2 examples of how much room is reserved in symbol 0 for a low capacity case and a high capacity case. Let me generate a low capacity subframe first. And now a high capacity one. So we can clearly see the difference between a low capacity case and a high capacity case. We don't have to necessarily read that channel, but we have to know where it is, so we can pick out the control channel and read it. So here we are. We know the extent of a control region and the location of the PCFICH, PHICH, and cell-specific reference signals within that region. We can now read the physical downlink control channel, or PDCCH, which fills the rest of the control region. The bad news, though, is that the organization of this channel is actually complicated, partly because LTE includes so many different transmission modes, which require different pieces of signaling information. For example, if you use spatial multiplexing, you need to know which precoding was applied, but you don't need to know about precoding if you are using TX diversity. Suffice to say that once you find out whether there is any control message for you in the PDCCH and read it, you will know all you need, including which resource blocks to read to retrieve your data, which transmission mode is being applied, and so forth. So now we are ready for the last step, which is extracting the actual data and reading it. From the PDCCH, we know which resource blocks to read in the physical downlink shared channel, or PDSCH, and we can finally read our data. So let's review our grid one last time and make sure we understand what we have here. First, the PSS, SSS, which come every 5 subframes, and let us figure out the frame timing and the cell ID or language the cell speaks. Then the PBCH, which informs us of the cell bandwidth and the room reserved for the PHICH. Now we read the PCFICH, which is sent over the whole bandwidth, and we understand how many control symbols this particular subframe includes. Then we can pick out where the PDCCH is. It is the first 1, 2, or 3 symbols, except for the locations of cell-specific reference signals, PCFICH and PHICH. This gives us information about where our data block lay and how they are being sent. Finally, we can retrieve, demodulate, and decode the data from the PDSCH. This concludes this video. For more information about LTE, including how to generate, measure, or demodulate LTE signals, please visit